Welcome to Let's Talk Hope, a podcast series aiming to reduce the stigma around suicide. In this series, we speak to a range of people who've been affected by or with lived experience of suicide. I'm your host, Gemma Cutting, and in each episode, I'm joined by Professor Pooja Saini, lead of the Suicide and Self-Harm Research Group at Liverpool John Moores University.
I wanted to do this series to showcase the voices of people who have been brave enough to speak about their experiences and who are constantly inspiring hope in other people who may find themselves in a similar situation. I'm in a unique position as an academic expert in suicide prevention who has had the opportunity to speak with people with personal experiences of suicide and those involved in setting up suicide-specific community-based services. My role has been to ensure that these services are designed to work well for the people who need them and that they embed evaluation and research to show the impact of their work.
In this series, you're going to hear from a really diverse range of people who really illustrate that anyone can be touched by suicide, regardless of age, background, or gender. These are important and impactful stories that we hope will open up conversations about suicide. And if you know someone who you feel would benefit from listening to this series, please pass it on. This episode is called Hope in Action, What Communities Can Do. And we had a really wide range of guests. So we had Jess Gallier, who runs the Martin Gallier Project. We spoke to Anne John, who's suicide prevention lead at Swansea University, and she basically runs suicide prevention in Wales. Mike Colefield, suicide prevention lead at Cheshire and Wirral Partnership NHS Trust. And Dean McShane, who's host of the Man Hug podcast and a senior lecturer in mental health. Now, these are people who are all working in the same sector, but in very different ways.
Yeah, and I think my paths have crossed with them for really different reasons. But what was amazing to see is how interlinked all of their work is and how they're now actually working together and complementing each other within suicide prevention.
Okay, let's see what they're doing. We've got a really interesting range of guests today, all working in different capacities to support people affected by suicide. So we're joined by Jess Gallier, Anne John, Mike Colefield and Dean McShane. And I thought it would be nice if we went round and if you all explained a bit about what you do. So Jess, let's start with you.
Okay, so it sounds fancy, but it's not. So I'm the CEO of a suicide prevention, intervention and post-prevention charity. CEO just means that you do a bit of everybody's job, the bit that everybody else doesn't really want to do. So I can give you examples from right across the board of what the service does. So suicide prevention, it's all about banging that drum, getting out there, getting those conversations going, all the fluffy stuff really. That's the easy bit. Suicide intervention, which I suppose is our core gig, is we operate a non-clinical suicide intervention service that is based on the high street with no barriers to access, no waiting list, no criteria, available to anyone over the age of 16, as long as suicide's a factor. And then our post-prevention services, all that stuff we do after somebody's considered suicide or after a death, and that's stuff that we do to help people rebuild their lives. So it's called the Martin Gallier Project. It was set up back in 2019, following my dad's death in 2017 to suicide. It's obviously named after him. And it's something that just grows and grows and grows week on week, day to day, at a ridiculous rate.
Okay, and Dean, how about you?
Yes, my name's Dean McShane. I'm a mental health nurse and a senior lecturer in mental health. And I'm one of 4 co-hosts of a men's mental health podcast called The Man Hug.
That's a great name.
I didn't come up with it. I'd like to say that I did, but Conliffe would probably be listening and he's got to take all the glory on that one. And
how long have you been doing the podcast for? And you know, what do you have guests on? Like what kind of format is it?
We're close to our second birthday, actually, so we've been running close to 2 years. It's got 3 main aims. The first one is that we give men with lived experience a platform to tell their story. The second aim is that we normalise the conversation, so that is often us talking about things like brain health and stats and data. And then the third aspect is we always get a service or an organisation in to help improve people's signposting skills. So every podcast features those 3 elements, and to date it's worked really well.
And Anne, can you tell us about you, please?
So I started off as a doctor. So I was a general practitioner. And what I realised was lots of the things that I wanted to say and change, I needed the evidence. So I'm now a professor of public health and psychiatry. I've done lots of training in between that. And I'm the director of the Wales National Centre for self-harm and suicide prevention. And I'm passionate about generating the evidence to understand why people reach why people self-harm, why they think about suicide, and then making sure that evidence gets into practice and gets into policy. And I've just come from a meeting this morning, actually, in Wales, where I think, talking to people delivering services on the ground, both in statutory services like the NHS, but also from the third sector, and generating the evidence for that and then making it happen because I can flash a paper around is what I'm passionate about. So it's sort of making a difference, but sometimes using dry data, often to tell us the things we already know.
And could you just explain for those who don't know what the third sector is?
So the third sector is sort of organisations like Samaritans, charities, sort of non-governmental sort of services like the NHS that have like legal responsibilities. So charities and organisations that I think sometimes feel that, one of the things that came up in the meeting this morning was that they're not being heard. They're on the ground working with people, they're seeing what's happening, but potentially not being heard.
Okay, thank you. And Mike, what about you?
So I work as a mental health nurse, but my current role is I'm a consultant nurse and also multi-professional approved clinician. So to explain that, because a lot of people often go, what exactly do you do? I'm one of the senior nurses and I work in acute inpatient care over at Beaumont Hospital over in Chester for Cheshire and Wirral Partnership. But the multi-professional approved clinician means that traditionally, if you are detained in hospital under the Mental Health Act, your responsible clinician would be historically and traditionally a consultant psychiatrist. So with the development of new roles, I can be a responsible clinician under the Mental Health Act, but as a nurse. So it's a role that's been in development over a number of years. But this side, I guess, and why I've been invited today is I'm also for Cheshire and Wirral Partnership, CWP. I'm the clinical lead for suicide prevention. So although I've got that clinical role as a day job as such, the strategic part of my role is very much, and has been probably for about the last 10, 12 years, around suicide prevention. So I developed and deliver one of our trust training packages around suicide awareness. I support research, as Pooja well knows, into suicide prevention. I have links with our voluntary sector, so I'm just name drop everyone, with Jess as well from the Martin Gallia project, but also I co-chair our Trust Suicide Prevention Intervention Group, which has the oversight of our newly developed Trust Suicide Prevention Strategy. And I also sit on the Cheshire Merseyside Partnership Board for Suicide Prevention and each of the local authorities that our Trust covers. And I also analyse our data for our patient with suspected suicide in the Trust as well, and support with producing reports around that. So, yeah, that's kind of it, really.
Just a bit then.
Yeah. But like Anne said, massively passionate about it and that thing around making a difference for people, not just the patients who we look after on a day-to-day basis, but that wider sort of arena around suicide prevention as well.
So I felt it was really important to have a group like this around having a conversation, because you're all kind of working at different parts of the kind of spectrum, if you like, of work that's going on, whether that's raising awareness and having really accessible podcasts in some case, with the conversations with a lot of people who've also been on other sessions within this series, or whether you're influencing policy or you're speaking with people coming off the street or speaking with people coming into the NHS. So I think it's really important for us to think about what the different roles these services are playing, or everyone's playing, in helping people, and the importance of each kind of service and how we can work together. So one example I could bring up now really is with Cheshire and Wirral Partnership and Martin Gallia project, where I think the NHS Trust has kind of seen the positive element of working with a statutory service. It'd be really good, Mike and Jess, if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about how that relationship's developed.
Yeah, sure. So
I'll let you go, Jess.
Go on then. Feel free to stop me, because I get so excited about this piece of work that I will just keep talking for ages.
No, that's great. You keep talking.
Okay, here we go. You'll regret that. So it kind of, we started as a charity like 6 years, coming up to 6 years ago, and we were kind of working away. We've seen a lot of everybody. And about a year in, CWP came to us and said, we're sending you a lot of people. We're sending a lot of people. There's a real gap in people that are presenting at A&E in a suicidal crisis. It is not a mental health condition. It is life stuff. And we're not equipped to deal with that. And we think that you are. That's in a nutshell. We all know that the NHS don't talk like that in very short sentences. But it was a long version of that, essentially. And it was like, can we come up with an idea? Can we do a bit of a pilot here and formalise this? So we did that. It was supposed to be about a 6-month pilot, but it lasted 2 or 3 months before we decided that this was definitely working and it was worth pursuing properly. So we then were given this subcontract from CWP. So we're talking maybe 3.5, 4 years ago at this point now. And it just worked really well, really quickly. And in essence, those people that go to A&E in a suicidal crisis, and it's life stuff, so like relationship breakdowns, struggling to see the children, financial problems, with the best will in the world, no amount of hours sat in a hospital are going to solve any of those things. And it's not medical, so those people were kind of off on their way, go back out into the community, really kind of upset with the system at this point. And a lot of them were representing kind of like 5, 6, 7 weeks later, and the same thing would happen. And no one would ever really get to the bottom of what was going on for them and do that piece of work. So that's where we came in. So somebody goes to the A&E department in a suicidal crisis and it's deemed that they're not going to be admitted. They don't need to be admitted. It's not the right place for them. And they don't meet that threshold for mental health care, I suppose. So they're referred into us by psychiatry liaison, home treatment team or crisis line. And we pick all of our referrals up within 24 hours. 24 hours is a stretch, to be honest, because usually they're still in the department when we pick up the phone to them and carry on that piece of work out in the community. And then we've got these really beautiful people that work for us, and we call them suicide intervention workers. And they do non-clinical interventions with these people, find out what exactly has got them to the point of suicide, find that hope, doubt or uncertainty that we can work with to create some safety for now, and then continue to work with them until that safety for now becomes a long-term safety thing. It works really well because the relationship is so strong between us and CWP that if we at any point think, hang on a minute, this is a you thing, then we just pick up the phone. Or if they think that they say they'll pick up the phone to us and say, hey, guys, can you have this conversation that we can't have? Being in the third sector, being a non-statutory service, there's things that we can say and do that the NHS can't do, and vice versa. The medical stuff, we can't touch that. We can't get involved with medication or anything like that. It's not what we're qualified to do. So that relationship being so strong is why that pathway works so well. And then earlier this year, last year, April, we expanded that contract. We'd always done it for Wirral, and we expanded it with some more investment to cover Chester, Macclesfield and Crewe. And Pooja's doing a lovely, proper evaluation of this at the minute. But when we evaluated internally, we did a cross-section of people that had been referred on this cohort, and we saw an 81.7% reduction in reattendance at A&E on those people that had been referred in on the pathway. So I think it's going well.
And if those people, if you didn't exist, if your service wasn't there, I'm guessing that those people would have nowhere to go. It would be straight back to A&E and out again because it's not the right place for them.
Yeah, exactly. And Mike might be better placed to speak on that. But I think that we're always told, aren't we, growing up, that if you're considering suicide and you're not safe, A&E is the place to go. And we're so far on from that as a society now. It doesn't work like that, and it's not the best place always. But I think there is a re-education piece to do there, isn't there, across the board, for people to understand that there are alternative provisions for crisis, and it's not always a medical thing.
Yeah. What would you say to that, Mike?
Firstly, I'd say I don't think I could explain it better than that, Jess.
Oh, thanks.
That's kind of the whole thing. It is. But I think to pick up on a few of those points, sort of from my view, I think one of the points that you made there about, that reduction in people representing to A&E, I think is a massive thing. Because, I think you said a question there about what was the alternative, and it often is, like traditionally, it is around A&E presentations, but the alternative sometimes is unthinkable as well. And I think the key point in saying around that, there are other places rather than the traditional attendance at A&E for somebody who's feeling suicidal, because we don't need to say what A&Es are like these days. They're so stretched, they're so busy, they're overwhelmed a lot of the times. It isn't the best place for somebody to go in suicidal crisis, but traditionally that's all there was. So I think the key thing is the links that we have as organisations with the likes of the Martin Gallia Project and the crisis cafes, for example, where people can go at those times. it's so important that we increase the awareness that these places are there for people to go. Because I'm a firm believer when we think about signposting as a concept, we don't know what we don't know. If we don't know as healthcare professionals what the alternatives are, we can't really expect the general public to know either. So I think, publicising these links and increasing the awareness of what's out there, that there is help out there that doesn't have to be hospital, it doesn't have to be A&E, I think is massively crucial. And, for us as an organisation, as NHS Trust, to publicise the use of voluntary sector and charitable organisations, I think is massive. Because my own view, my personal view is I think there's a big gap between within healthcare for people either with mental health problems or who are suicidal, where you kind of have primary care, and you'll appreciate this, Anne, as well. You have kind of your GP land, for want of a better way of putting it, and then you have your secondary mental health services, for example, where I am. And I think you're right, Jess, in what you're saying, that mental health services isn't always for the suicidal person, because it isn't always mental health or sort of mental disorder that's leading somebody to feel like they don't want to live anymore. So this void that's in the middle is being filled by all these amazing organisations in the voluntary sector, and I think the NHS are promoting that, and like the work that the links with Martin Gallia, a testament to that actually to promote these great organisations who are doing this great work is something that the future needs to look like.
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate to be doing evaluations at both CWP and now with Martin Gallia or similar organisations, and I think embedding the use of research and data and how we showcase the impact of all these different types of services that can be helpful in suicide prevention are really important. And Anne, I was going to come to you next anyway to talk about the importance of data and everything else you've been involved in.
So I work with data that's collected as part of people's everyday lives. So their contacts with A&E and their contacts with primary care. And it's all anonymised. But it means that, there are certain things that we say almost as standard in the field. We sort of say, men don't seek help. And we can look at the data, and what we see is that, men don't seek help for suicidal thoughts and self-harm as much as women. But in that time leading up to taking their own lives, there is escalating health seeking. And we also need to think about how we respond. And there's a huge amount of research and data out there showing us that people feel like they're pushed from pillar to post when they're contacting A&E. There's lots of reasons for that. Sometimes it's to do with rules about substance use, sometimes it's to do with waiting times, sometimes it's to do with everything else that's going on in that service. And looking towards, this different sort of provision, I think really is filling a gap that's existed for a very long time. And, Pooja's doing really good work, making sure that the evidence base is behind that, so that people feel comfortable doing that signposting. Because I think, for those of us that have worked in the field in whatever way we've done it, know that the need is there.
On that, in the training that I deliver, we use the National Confidential Inquiry into Suicide and Safety data. And one of the things and one of the themes from this year's report is people with one-off assessments who maybe present to A&E or present to mental health services, because that's what the report looks at. And when you look at the factors of those people who had the one-off assessments who took their own lives, the risk factors were often not about mental health. So I think it just reinforces, like you were saying there, and reinforces using the evidence and the data that we've got to think actually the signposting where somebody isn't for a mental health services because they don't need that service, that signposting to organisations that are out there like Martin Gallia and like others is so crucial for those working in mental health services that, which it's shown in the data that people who have those one-off assessments, there's an increasing number who are taking their own lives. So it's just, again, I think it's that importance of signposting to know what services is out there, and professionals working in mental health care know what's out there to signpost people towards.
Yeah.
And it's those broad issues, isn't it? Housing, employment, debt, relationship problems. And having the time to do those assessments and help look at how those might be managed.
Yeah, and I think another element of, we're obviously doing a podcast today, and I've obviously come across the man hug and some of the topics that you cover there, and I felt it was really important for you to be part of this conversation as well, because I think the work you're doing is also, really informing, raising awareness and prevention. So it'd be great to hear about some of the topics you've covered that really relate to what we've spoken about today.
So I think when we started off, we just wanted to help increase people's signposting knowledge. So if you were listening to someone's story, you'd have an option of where you could go, and every episode, for example, has Jake Mills from the Hub of Hope telling people it's on your phone. It's basically like the Just Eat of mental health. And we all know how to get a kebab, don't we, anywhere, but do we know how to access mental health support? So we plug that from every single podcast that we do, which is a great start. And then we get all of these amazing organisations and charities on just to tell us all about what they do. And a lot of it is just a really good example. We recently had the Samaritans on. And for someone like myself who's worked in mental health for over 20 years, I don't know what that phone call looks like. So we just normalised it and said, what is the phone call if I was ringing up now? So we actually ran through what a phone call would be like. And we challenged some misconceptions about things like the Samaritans as well. It's not a crisis line. It's not a suicide line. It's there for anyone who just needs someone to listen to as well. So we do a lot of that, which is really good. And we know, it knocks down a lot of barriers and misconceptions that people have. And then all of these amazing grassroots organisations and charities and places, we shine a spotlight on those. We get people on and we talk about what the referral process looks like, whether it's open door like yourself or people can just go there. And we do that for all kinds of different topics and themes. A lot of them, as I say, it's aimed at men's mental health, but most people all have a man in their life, whether it's the brother, the dad, sons, whoever. So our listenership is about 50-50 male and female as well. So we know we're hitting the right type of people. One of the really amazing things that we like to do, as I say, is have someone who just tells their story, and we just know the inspiration that story has. It's done in a really safe way. And our feedback and the response we've had from people's stories has absolutely blown us away. We've seen responses of people who said, I've heard that story and now I've gone and got help, or I've heard that story and it's inspired me to go and talk with someone, and the responses have just blown us away. And I think that's why it's a labour of love, and that's why we carry on doing what we're doing with it.
I think it's interesting, Dean, with what you're doing, because Pooja referenced this at the beginning. You're all working in a similar field, but doing it in a very different way from each other. And I suppose, Dean, with the podcast, that's there for people who maybe don't want to go and talk to somebody face to face, who aren't ready to do that. And they can do that in a very private way and hear these stories of hope. And obviously you're doing the signposting as well, but that's something that I hadn't really considered before, is that people who aren't ready to reach out yet.
Yeah, and it's a big thing, isn't it? If it just gives people options and things to consider, and even if their first task is to go and log onto the internet and find out what that service does, and has a look at a street view of what the building looks like, anything like that, they're all tiny steps, aren't they? And I think, these are things that we originally thought about. And the middle section we always have on the podcast is just us as four blokes just trying to normalise the conversation. Though we're all nurses and we're academics, we do it in a way where sometimes we bring in our own stories, and we look at brain health in a way of just saying, just trying to normalise that this happens to us all, and I think that's a key area of it.
Some of the interviews we've been doing actually with people who have used services, who've been in crisis, it's been really interesting, because some of the NHS services haven't really been meeting their needs. And then they've gone to some of these charities or third sector organisations that have met the need when they're in crisis. But that support has actually helped them go back to the NHS to get the help that they require at a time that they're in a better place to receive it. So it's really interesting that it's not just the one or the other. They can actually work together really complementary as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting. You mentioned it at the beginning, Mike. All of you are kind of interconnected in some way. Like, we've had Jake on a different episode, Dean, and you said he's been on your podcast, and Mike and Jess, you've been working together, and it's interesting how everyone is coming together.
Dean, do you want to say what our links are?
I best not on this podcast, to be honest, Mike.
Oh God. I used to work at the University of Chester, and Dean was one of my students when he was a student there, so we've known each other a long time.
Hang on, Mike, you said one of your students. You didn't say the best student.
Well, I didn't want, that head's getting me big.
Okay.
But you're right, though, the interlink between how our paths have crossed again like clinically after you qualified as well, Dean, and then I'd done some teaching for Dean as well, with the university. So, and Jess, obviously, at our suicide prevention launch and our trust, we had Jake speaking at our suicide prevention strategy launch as well. So it is this kind of network that we're developing, all doing this work all together. It's brilliant. It just really is. And because everyone's just so passionate about it all.
And just to highlight how important, it's one of the things that people often say to me when they're talking about services like A&E or going to see their GP, is that they don't know what to say. And I think, that description you gave of like, what does a Samaritan's listening call sound like? What's the sort of way that I talk to a GP? It's like really having that understanding of how powerful those really simple things are in terms of encouraging people to seek help. And I really agree with Pooja. I think between that sort of toolbox of being able to access that whole myriad of things that interconnect and make everything more accessible is really important.
Yeah, and I think in this episode, we've talked about lots of different services that you can access in different ways and for different reasons, I guess. And obviously, all of those services will be in the show notes. So if you've missed anything, just go to the show notes and you can find everything that you'll need that we've referenced in this episode. But thank you so much for all being here. It's been really interesting hearing you talk.
That's all right. You're welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Let's Talk Hope, a podcast series aiming to end the stigma around suicide. Brought to you by Professor Pooja Saini, head of the Suicide and Self-Harm Research Group at Liverpool John Moores University. If you or someone you know has been affected by any of the issues discussed in this episode, please refer to the help and resources listed in the show notes for details of organisations that can provide support. This podcast was produced by Inabella Media and hosted by me, Gemma Cutting. Thanks for listening.